Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
From the moment I was old enough to notice, it was clear I wasn't the favorite. In fact, I wasn't even close. Michael was the golden boy, the star athlete who could do no wrong. Every trophy he brought home was displayed on a custom-made shelf in the living room. Family dinners revolved around his latest game or his plans for college sports scholarships. My parents were his biggest fans, practically beaming with pride every time they spoke his name. Then there was Anna, the darling of the family. She had charm down to a science, knowing exactly how to turn a mistake into a laugh or a stern word into a smile. Teachers loved her, boys adored her, and my parents treated her like she was the princess in a house where I was the court jester. Useful only for the occasional laugh, but never taken seriously. And then there was me, Sam, the kid who read too much, who loved taking apart electronics to see how they worked, who got lost in his own thoughts instead of on the field or at the center of attention. Sam's just different, my dad would say when relatives asked about me. It wasn't a compliment. I remember the day I won the regional science fair. I was 14, and I'd spent weeks designing a prototype for an energy-efficient cooling system. My teacher was so impressed that she encouraged me to enter the competition, and to my shock, I won first place. I came home that day, clutching my blue ribbon and certificate, practically bursting with excitement. "Mom, Dad, I won," I announced, holding up the ribbon. "That's great, honey," my mom said distractedly as she set the table. "Dinner's almost ready. Go wash up." Michael walked in a moment later, tossing his football gear onto the couch. "Coach said I might start as quarterback next game," he announced. "Really?" Dad said, his face lighting up. "That's incredible, son. Let's celebrate." I stood there, holding my ribbon, watching as the family erupted in cheers for Michael's potential achievement, while my actual accomplishment went unnoticed. Those moments added up over the years. Every time I tried to share something I was proud of, it was overshadowed by Michael's wins or Anna's charisma. When I was 16, I started to pull away. I spent more time in my room, tinkering with gadgets and dreaming of a future where I could finally be seen for who I was. I stopped trying to join in at family dinners, knowing I'd only feel invisible. Instead, I poured my energy into learning. I taught myself coding, watched hours of tutorials on engineering and design, and started freelancing for small tech projects online. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. By the time I turned 18, I'd saved enough money to move out. I'll never forget the look on my mom's face when I told her I was leaving. It wasn't sadness or pride, it was confusion. "Why so soon?" she asked, as if the idea of me striking out on my own was absurd. "I need space," I said simply, packing the last of my belongings into a battered suitcase. Michael had just come back from practice, his varsity jacket slung over one shoulder. "Guess you're finally flying the coop," huh, he said with a smirk. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Time to see what I could do?" Anna breezed into the room, barely looking up from her phone. "Well, good luck, I guess," she said. No one offered to help me pack. No one asked if I'd be okay. And as I walked out the door, there was no fanfare, no heartfelt goodbye, just the sound of the TV in the living room and the faint clinking of dishes in the kitchen. That night, as I sat in my tiny studio apartment surrounded by boxes, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let their indifference define me. I wasn't going to spend my life chasing their approval. I would prove my worth, not to them, but to myself. Looking back, I wonder how many of us carry the weight of being the family outsider. Does it drive us to succeed, or does it leave scars that never fully heal? Let me know, because for me, moving out was just the beginning of a journey I never could have imagined. The early years on my own were anything but glamorous. That first apartment, if you could even call it that, was barely big enough for a bed, let alone the dreams I carried with me. The walls were thin, the heat unreliable, and the kitchen sink doubled as my dishwashing station and laundry setup. But it was mine, a space where I could finally breathe without the constant shadow of comparison. I started out waiting tables at a dingy diner down the street. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills and left me with enough time to focus on what I really cared about: technology. Every spare moment was spent in front of my secondhand laptop, teaching myself coding through free tutorials and online forums. I couldn't afford fancy courses or certifications, but I had an insatiable curiosity and a determination that wouldn't quit. I picked up freelance gigs wherever I could, building websites for small businesses, troubleshooting networks for neighbors, and eventually designing custom apps for clients I found through word of mouth. Each project taught me something new, and slowly, I began to build a reputation. The turning point came 3 years after I moved out. One of my freelance clients, a local entrepreneur, recommended me to a tech startup that needed help revamping their outdated systems. It was my first major contract, and I threw myself into the work, spending sleepless nights debugging code and optimizing their platform. When the project launched, their success was my success. Word spread quickly, and before I knew it, I had more clients than I could handle. That's when the idea hit me. Why not start my own company? It was a risky move, but I had nothing to lose. Using the money I'd saved from freelancing, I registered my business, rented a tiny office space, and hired 2 part-time employees to help me manage the workload. We worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and a shared belief that we were building something meaningful. The first few years were tough. There were months when I barely broke even, and times when I wondered if I'd made a mistake. But slowly, the hard work paid off. Clients became repeat customers, word-of-mouth referrals grew, and my little company started to gain traction in the tech world. By year 5, we'd expanded to a team of 20, specializing in custom software solutions for mid-sized businesses. I remember the day I signed my first 6-figure contract, a moment that felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. I'd gone from scraping by to running a company that was making real waves in the industry. But even as my career soared, my family remained a distant presence. I reached out occasionally, hoping to bridge the gap that had always existed between us. I sent my parents holiday cards with handwritten notes, called on birthdays, and even invited them to visit me in the city. Their responses were polite but indifferent. My mom would thank me for the card, but never ask how I was doing. My dad would mumble a quick happy birthday before launching into updates about Michael's coaching job or Anna's growing family. It was clear that in their eyes, I was still the odd one out, the kid who never quite fit. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. After all, I'd build a life for myself without their help. I had friends who celebrated my successes, a team that believed in my vision, and a company that was thriving. But deep down, I couldn't shake the longing for acknowledgement. That acknowledgement came in the most unexpected way. One morning, I opened my email to find a link to a news article from a business journal. The headline read, "From Small Beginnings to Big Success: How One Entrepreneur is Changing the Game in Tech." The article was about my company, highlighting our journey from a scrappy startup to an industry leader. It was a proud moment, one that felt like validation for all the years of hard work. Later that day, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "Saw the article about your company. Congrats. We're so proud of you." I stared at the screen, my emotions a tangled mess. This was the first time in years my parents had acknowledged my achievements. But instead of feeling joy, I felt conflicted. Where had this pride been when I was struggling? When I was working 16-hour days to make ends meet? Have you ever received praise from someone who ignored your struggles, and instead of feeling celebrated, you felt hollow? Let me know. Because for me, that message was just the beginning of a journey I wasn't prepared for. The invitation came in the form of a cheerful phone call from my mom. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. "We're having a family dinner next weekend," she said, her voice unusually warm. "Your dad and I would love for you to come." I paused, unsure how to respond. In the years since I'd moved out, my family had rarely invited me to anything, let alone a family dinner. Most gatherings were mentioned in passing after the fact, with the excuse that we figured you were busy. "Sure," I said cautiously. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," she replied quickly. "We just want to catch up. It's been too long." Her tone was light, but something about it didn't sit right. Still, a small part of me wanted to believe that this was genuine, that maybe, just maybe, my family had finally seen me for who I was. The night of the dinner, I arrived at my parents' house with a mix of nerves and cautious optimism. The house hadn't changed much since I'd left. The same faded wallpaper, the same cluttered shelves filled with Michael's trophies and Anna's framed certificates. There wasn't a trace of me anywhere, but I'd long since stopped expecting otherwise. As soon as I walked through the door, my mom greeted me with an enthusiastic hug. "There's our star," she said, beaming. "Hey, Mom," I said, a bit taken aback by her enthusiasm. My dad appeared a moment later, clapping me on the back. "Look at you, Sam," he said, his grin wide. "All grown up and running the show. We've been reading about you, you know. That article was something else." "Thanks," I said, unsure of what to make of their sudden pride. At dinner, the attention was relentless. "Tell us more about your company," my mom said, passing me the breadbasket. "What's the secret to your success?" "It's just hard work," I said modestly. "A lot of late nights and a bit of luck." Michael leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "Hard work, huh? Guess all those nights tinkering in your room paid off. Anna chimed in, her tone playful but pointed. You're not the same quiet little Sam we used to know. Look at you now, a big shot. The table erupted in laughter, but I felt a pang of discomfort. Their comments didn't feel like admiration. They felt like a reminder of who I used to be, as if they couldn't reconcile that version of me with the man sitting at their table. As the meal went on, the conversation began to shift. You know, my dad said, swirling his glass of wine, it's really incredible what you've built, Sam. We're all so proud of you. Thanks, Dad, I said, offering a small smile. It's just seeing how successful you've become, it got us thinking, he continued, glancing at my mom. She nodded, her expression a mix of eagerness and hesitation. We've always believed in helping each other out as a family, she said. And with everything you've achieved, we thought maybe it's time for you to give back. I set my fork down, my appetite suddenly gone. Give back, I repeated. You've done so well for yourself, my mom said, her tone sweet but calculated. And well, Michael's had some financial setbacks with the new house, and Anna's dealing with a lot raising 3 kids. It would mean so much if you could help out, just a little. I stared at her, stunned. You're asking me to give money to Michael and Anna? Not just them, my dad interjected. We were thinking of it as more of a family contribution. You know, to show appreciation for everything we've done for you. I blinked, my chest tightening. Everything you've done for me? My mom's smile faltered. Raising you, supporting you, giving you a roof over your head. Those things aren't free, Sam. And we've always been there for you, haven't we? I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. Always been there for me? You ignored me for most of my life. The only reason I've gotten this far is because I worked for it on my own. The table fell silent. Sam, we're not saying you owe us, Anna said, breaking the tension. We're just saying it's what families do. We help each other out. Michael smirked. Yes, Sam. Don't be stingy. It's not like you can't afford it. I clenched my fists under the table, fighting to keep my composure. I've worked hard for what I have, I said evenly. And I'm not going to let you guilt me into giving it away. Guilt you, my dad snapped, his tone sharp. We're your family, Sam. Everything you've accomplished is because of the foundation we gave you. You wouldn't even be where you are without us. I pushed my chair back, the sound echoing in the tense room. If this is why you invited me here, I said, my voice firm, then I think we're done. Sam, don't be dramatic, my mom pleaded. We're just asking for a little help. I shook my head. You're asking for a piece of what I've built. And that's not going to happen. What would you do if your family suddenly decided they were entitled to your success? Would you stand your ground, or would guilt win out? Let me know, because for me, this was the moment I realized just how much my family hadn't changed. The fallout from that dinner was immediate. The day after I walked out, Michael called. Not to apologize or smooth things over, but to pick up right where our parents had left off. Hey, Sam, he started, his tone unusually cheerful. Listen, I've been thinking about what Dad said last night, and I think he's got a point. Family should help family, right? I sighed, already exhausted. Michael, if this is about money. Of course it's about money, he interrupted, his voice taking on a defensive edge. You're doing great, and I'm struggling to keep up with the mortgage. It's not like I'm asking for a handout. Just a little help to get back on track. I pinched the bridge of my nose, willing myself to stay calm. Michael, I worked for years to get to where I am. I can't just hand over money every time someone asks for it. Wow, he said, letting out a bitter laugh. So, that's how it is? You're too good for us now? Too good for your own brother? This isn't about being too good, I shot back. It's about boundaries. Boundaries, he repeated mockingly. Sure, Sam. Go ahead and enjoy your fancy life while the rest of us struggle. Real family of the year material. He hung up before I could respond. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. Anna was next, her tone dripping with false sweetness. Hey, little brother, she said, as if we hadn't spoken the night before. I was hoping we could talk. What's on your mind, Anna? I asked warily. Well, she began, drawing out the word. I've been thinking about how hard things have been for Michael lately. And, honestly, I could use a little help too. Raising 3 kids isn't cheap, you know? I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my frustration in check. Anna, I can't just hand out money because you're having a hard time. I have my own responsibilities. Oh, come on, she said, her voice sharp. You don't even have kids. What could you possibly need that kind of money for? Her words stung, but I kept my tone measured. My life isn't your business, Anna, and my money isn't a free-for-all. Well, she said coldly, don't expect us to be there for you when you need family. It wasn't just Michael and Anna. My parents began calling daily, their voices a mix of guilt tripping and outright anger. "We raised you," my mom said during one call, her tone heavy with indignation. "We sacrificed so much for you, Sam. And now, when we need you, you're turning your back on us?" "I'm not turning my back on anyone," I replied. "But I'm not going to let you treat me like a bank. You wouldn't even have the success without us," my dad added. "How can you be so ungrateful?" "Ungrateful?" I said, my voice rising. "Do you even hear yourselves? You ignored me for years, dismissed everything I cared about, and now that I've made something of myself, you think you're entitled to it?" "Stop being so dramatic," my mom snapped. "We're just asking for a little help. That's what families do." But that wasn't what families did, not mine anyway. Growing up, no one had ever gone out of their way to help me. When I needed support, I was told to figure it out on my own. When I succeeded, my accomplishments were brushed aside. And now, the same people who had ignored me for years were acting like I owed them everything. The resentment simmered, growing stronger with every call, every text, every guilt-laden voicemail. But the final straw came one afternoon when a distant cousin reached out on social media. "Hey Sam," the message read. "Congrats on all your success. Your parents told us how generous you've been, helping the family out. That's amazing, man. Not everyone would do that." I stared at the message, my stomach twisting in anger. My parents had already told the extended family that I was taking care of them, painting me as a benevolent provider when I hadn't given them a dime. The lies weren't just infuriating. They were calculated. They'd set the narrative so that if I refused to give in, I'd look like the selfish one. That night, I sat in my office, replaying every conversation in my mind. Michael's accusations, Anna's entitlement, my parents' guilt-tripping, and now, the web of lies they'd spun to make themselves look good. It was clear, this wasn't about love or family. This was about control. What do you do when the people you're supposed to trust the most treat you like a resource instead of a person? Let me know, because for me, this was the moment I realized I needed to take a stand, no matter the cost. I hadn't planned on confronting them that night. But after receiving another message from a cousin congratulating me on my supposed generosity, I couldn't hold back anymore. It was late, but I called my parents anyway. "Sam," my mom answered, her voice slightly groggy. "Everything okay?" "No, it's not," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. "We need to talk." "Talk about what?" she asked, her feigned innocence immediately grating. "About the lies," I said. "You've been telling people I'm supporting the family financially. Why would you do that?" There was a pause, and then my dad's voice came over the line. "What's the big deal, Sam? They're just proud of you." "Proud of me?" I repeated, my anger bubbling up. "You've told the entire family I'm taking care of you. Do you have any idea how that makes me look when I haven't given you a cent?" "We assumed you would eventually," my mom said defensively. "It's not like you can't afford it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's not the point. You can't just decide I'm responsible for everyone's problems and then lie about it to guilt me into giving you money. Don't raise your voice at your mother," my dad snapped. "Don't deflect," I shot back. "This isn't about how I'm talking to you. It's about how you've been manipulating me. Do you even realize how wrong this is?" "Wrong," my mom said, her voice growing shrill. "What's wrong is you turning your back on the people who raised you. We gave you everything, Sam, and this is how you repay us." "Everything," I said, laughing bitterly. "What exactly did you give me? Because all I remember is being ignored while Michael and Anna got all the attention. I worked my ass off to get where I am today, and I did it without your help." "You're exaggerating," my dad said dismissively. "We always believed in you." I could feel my jaw tighten. "Believed in me? Are you serious? You never even noticed me. And now that I've made something of myself, you think you're entitled to what I've built? That's not belief, it's opportunism." The room on their end went quiet for a moment before my mom spoke again. "We're your family, Sam. Everything we've done was for you and your siblings. You're acting like we're strangers, but we're your parents. We deserve a little gratitude." I leaned back in my chair, incredulous. Gratitude for what? For making me feel like an outsider my entire life? For only caring about me when I became successful enough to benefit you? "That's enough," my dad growled. "We didn't call you a failure, did we? We didn't throw you out when you were struggling. We gave you a home, food, and support." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. "You gave me the bare minimum, Dad, and I've been paying for it emotionally ever since." The conversation spiraled from there, my parents trading barbs, excuses, and guilt-laden accusations as I pushed back against their manipulative tactics. "You're being selfish," my mom said at one point. "All we're asking for is a little help." "Is that so much to ask?" It is when help means sacrificing everything I've worked for, I shot back. I'm not your bank. I'm not Michael's or Anna's safety net. I'm my own person, and I won't let you guilt me into giving away what I've earned. This isn't about guilt, my dad said, his voice sharp. It's about responsibility. Families take care of each other, Sam. And where was that responsibility when I needed it? I countered. Where was the family when I was struggling to figure out my place in the world? You didn't care then, so don't act like we're suddenly a close-knit unit now. By the end of the conversation, it was clear there was no middle ground. You're making a huge mistake, my dad said, his voice cold. Am I? I replied. Because all I see is a family that only cares about me when there's something in it for them. If you walk away from this, my mom added, her tone dripping with warning, don't expect us to welcome you back. You're either with us or you're not. I stared at the phone in disbelief. So that's how it is? You've made it clear where you stand, my dad said flatly. And we'll remember that. When the call ended, I sat in silence, the weight of their words settling over me. I'd always known my relationship with my family was complicated, but this was something else entirely. For the first time in years, I felt completely untethered, free, but also adrift. What do you do when standing up for yourself means risking the only connection you've ever had to your family? Would you back down or hold your ground? Let me know. Because for me, this was the moment I realized the cost of setting boundaries was higher than I'd ever imagined. In the days after the confrontation with my parents, the silence was deafening. No calls, no messages, just a heavy, oppressive void that hung over me like a storm cloud. At first, I felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. On one hand, I'd stood my ground, refusing to let their manipulation dictate my life. On the other, the cost of that choice lingered in my mind. I was cutting ties with the people who were supposed to be my family, people I'd once hoped would one day see me for who I truly was. I spent hours reflecting on how I'd gotten to this point. Growing up, I'd always felt like an outsider, but it wasn't until now that I truly understood how much that had shaped me. Being overlooked by my family had forced me to become fiercely independent, to work harder and push myself further than anyone else. I thought about the countless nights I'd spent teaching myself skills, the years of struggle and sacrifice that had led to my success. And I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't successful in spite of my family's rejection. I was successful because of it. Their indifference had fueled my determination. Their neglect had taught me resilience. And their favoritism had shown me exactly who I didn't want to be. For the first time, I began to see my worth as something separate from their approval. I confided in my closest friends, people who had seen me through the highs and lows of my journey. Over coffee one afternoon, I opened up to my friend Melissa, who had known me since college. I just feel lost, I admitted, staring into my mug, like I've spent my whole life trying to prove something to them. And now that I've stopped, I don't know what comes next. Melissa gave me a sympathetic smile. Sam, you've already proven everything you need to. You don't owe them anything. Not your time, not your money, and definitely not your peace of mind. I nodded, her words sinking in. You've built an incredible life for yourself, she continued, and you've done it without their help. That says more about you than anything they've ever done or said. Don't let them take that away from you. Later that week, I met up with my friend Marcus, who had a knack for cutting through the noise. They're mad because they can't control you anymore, he said bluntly. And they're using guilt to try to pull you back in. But they're my family, I said, the weight of those words pressing down on me. Marcus shook his head. Family doesn't treat you like a paycheck, Sam. Family supports you, respects you, and values you for who you are, not what you can give them. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much my parents' demands had been weighing on me. Their constant expectations, the endless guilt trips, the blatant manipulation. It wasn't just frustrating. It was toxic, and I was done letting it control my life. I began setting firm boundaries, blocking their numbers and refusing to engage with their messages. When Michael and Anna reached out again with thinly veiled pleas for money, I told them in no uncertain terms that my answer was final. It wasn't easy. The guilt still lingered, whispering that I was abandoning my family, that I was being selfish. But for the first time, I felt a sense of empowerment, like I was finally taking control of my life. Then the letter arrived. It came in a plain white envelope, marked with the return address of a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it cautiously, my heart sinking as I read the first line. This letter serves as formal notice that your parents, George and Linda Miller, are initiating legal action against you. I scanned the document, my hands trembling as I absorbed the words. They were suing me, claiming they were entitled to a portion of my wealth for raising me and providing foundational support that enabled my success. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It felt surreal, like some twisted nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The letter detailed their expenses over the years, from school supplies to food and housing, as if the basic responsibilities of parenting were a debt I now owed them. I sat in stunned silence, the weight of the betrayal crushing me. How could they do this? How could the people who brought me into this world twist something as sacred as family into a legal battle for money? For a moment, I felt the familiar pang of guilt, the instinct to give and just to make it all go away. But then I remembered Melissa's words, Marcus's blunt advice, and the strength I'd found in standing up for myself. This wasn't about money. This was about control, and I wasn't going to let them win. What do you do when the people who raised you turn their love into a transaction? Would you fight back or fold under the pressure? Let me know, because for me, this was the moment I realized just how far I was willing to go to protect my peace. The letter from the lawyer was the final straw. It wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war. My parents were trying to frame their neglect as support, as though the years they spent ignoring me had somehow paved the way for my success. I wasn't going to let them rewrite history. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her name was Natalie Park, and from the moment I stepped in her office, I knew I was in good hands. She was sharp, direct, and unapologetically confident. "This is absurd," she said after reviewing the letter. "They have no legal grounds for this. Parenting isn't a financial transaction. Tell that to them," I muttered, leaning back in my chair. Natalie looked at me thoughtfully. "This isn't just about money, is it?" "No," I admitted. "It's about control. They've spent my whole life dismissing me, and now that I've succeeded without them, they're trying to claw their way back in." "Well," she said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, "they picked the wrong fight." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, paperwork, and emotional roller coasters. Natalie and her team dug into every claim my parents had made, dismantling their arguments piece by piece. Their lawsuit alleged that they had provided me with foundational support, but Natalie was quick to point out the glaring inconsistencies. "Foundational support?" she said during one meeting, rolling her eyes. "They didn't even pay for your college, and you've been financially independent since you were 18. What exactly are they claiming here? That feeding you as a child was some kind of investment?" I laughed bitterly. Apparently, as the case moved forward, more layers of manipulation began to surface. Michael and Anna had written statements supporting my parents, painting them as selfless caregivers who had sacrificed everything for their children. Reading their words felt like a punch to the gut. "Sam has always been the difficult one," Anna's statement read. "Our parents did their best to support him, but he was never satisfied." Michael's was worse. "Our parents' guidance and encouragement were critical to Sam's success. It's only fair that he gives back to the family that shaped him." I threw the papers onto the table, my hands shaking with anger. "They're rewriting the whole damn narrative," I said, my voice trembling. "They're making it sound like I'm some ungrateful brat who had everything handed to me." Natalie nodded grimly. "It's manipulation, plain and simple. But don't worry, we'll expose the truth." The court case was brutal. During the hearings, my parents sat at the plaintiff's table, their expressions a mix of indignation and self-righteousness. Michael and Anna were there too, casting me smug looks every time the judge addressed me. Their lawyer tried to paint a picture of a loving, supportive family who had been betrayed by my success. They brought up stories of family dinners, vacations, and other carefully curated moments that conveniently ignored the reality of my childhood. But Natalie was relentless. She presented evidence of my independence, from the part-time jobs I worked as a teenager to the freelance gigs that funded my first apartment. She highlighted the years of neglect, the blatant favoritism, and the complete lack of financial support I'd received after leaving home. When my parents' lawyer tried to argue that their emotional support had been instrumental in my success, Natalie countered with a pointed question. "Can you name a single instance where my client's parents encouraged his career in technology?" The silence in the courtroom was deafening. As the case dragged on, the emotional toll began to wear on me. Every day felt like a battle, not just in court but within myself. I questioned my decisions, wondering if it was worth the pain of airing my family's dirty laundry in public. But every time doubt crept in, I thought about the life I'd built, the long nights, the sacrifices, the years of struggle. I thought about Sophie and Ben, my employees who had put their trust in me. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for everything I'd worked for. The final hearing was tense. After weeks of arguments, testimonies, and cross-examinations, the judge delivered her verdict. This court finds no legal basis for the plaintiff's claims. The defendant is under no obligation to provide financial support to the plaintiffs or any other family members. Case dismissed. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As we left the courtroom, my parents approached me, their faces twisted with anger. "You'll regret this," my dad said, his voice low and venomous. "You've turned your back on your family, and we won't forget it." My mom added, "Don't bother coming back. You're dead to us." I stared at them, my heart heavy but resolute. "I didn't turn my back on you," I said quietly. "You turned your back on me a long time ago." What happens when standing up for yourself means losing everything you thought you wanted? Would you risk it all to protect your peace? Or would the weight of family ties hold you back? Let me know, because for me, this was the moment I realized freedom comes at a cost. The months after the court case felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel. The fight had left me drained, physically and emotionally. For weeks, I carried the weight of everything that had happened. The accusations, the betrayals, the painful realization of just how little my family truly cared for me beyond what I could offer them. But as the dust began to settle, so did my mind. One morning, I sat in my favorite corner of the local park, a cup of coffee warming my hands as the early sunlight broke through the trees. It was a place I hadn't visited in years, a quiet spot where I used to come to think during those early days of building my business. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself breathe. No angry messages, no courtroom battles, no accusations hanging over me like a storm cloud. Just peace. That's when it hit me. I had won. Not just the court case, but my freedom. For years, I'd lived under the shadow of my family's indifference, constantly seeking their approval, their acknowledgement, their love. And while it hurt to admit that I might never have those things, the realization came with an unexpected sense of liberation. Their opinions no longer held power over me. The next step was rebuilding. The emotional scars from the court case were raw, but I knew I couldn't let them define me. I began focusing on the people who had stood by me, the friends who cheered me on when my family hadn't, the colleagues who respected me for my work, and the mentors who believed in me when I doubted myself. I started hosting small dinners in my apartment, inviting people who genuinely cared about me. We laughed, shared stories, and built connections that felt real. It wasn't the family I was born into, but it was the family I chose. One night, during one of these dinners, Melissa raised a toast. To Sam, she said, her glass raised high, for showing us what it means to stand tall, even when the ground shakes beneath you. The room erupted in cheers, and for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Not as the black sheep or the outcast, but as someone worthy of love and respect. Of course, there were still moments of doubt. There were nights when I lay awake, replaying the final words my parents had spoken to me outside the courtroom. Their anger, their bitterness, their vow to cut me off forever. Had I made the right choice? Was standing my ground worth the price of losing them? But every time those questions crept in, I reminded myself of the truth. The family I'd lost wasn't the family I needed. They'd shown me who they were, people who saw me as a resource, not a person. And while their absence left a void, it was better than the constant pain of trying to fit into a mold that was never made for me. Months later, life had taken on a new rhythm. My business continued to thrive, but I learned to balance work with the things that truly mattered. I took weekends off to spend time with friends, traveled to places I'd always dreamed of visiting, and even started mentoring young entrepreneurs who reminded me of myself. Then, one afternoon, as I was sifting through emails at my desk, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a message from my mom. "Sam, your dad and I want to talk. Can we meet? We need to fix this." I stared at the screen, my emotions a tangled mix of curiosity, anger, and something I couldn't quite name. Fix this? After everything they'd done? The younger version of me, the one who craved their love and approval, might have jumped at the chance. But the person I'd become, the one who had fought for his peace and self-respect, wasn't so easily swayed. I didn't respond. Instead, I closed the message, set my phone down, and walked out into the crisp afternoon air. Standing under the open sky, I realized something important. Forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. I could let go of the pain without letting them back into my life. Their absence would always leave a scar, but scars are proof of healing. Can you truly move forward without your family? Or will their absence always leave a void? Let me know, because for me, this journey taught me that sometimes Walking away is the only way to find yourself.